All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll pray for us. Father, I pray you help us today. I pray that you would encourage us. Give us an ability in this ancient, beautiful, difficult language. Help us understand more of the concepts each day. And I pray you give us a love for this language. And we pray all of it in Christ's name. Amen. So I updated a section to worksheet 2. If you printed this out to make yourself a book of the thing, you could reprint this out. And I added a section, why is pointing so hard? You know, when we talk about how to read this, it seems, I don't know if you've felt that way, but it seems like it isn't a real easy system to grasp. Well, I just wanted to point some things out. This is a picture of manuscript B19A. This is the actual text that all printed Hebrew Bibles go back to. It's called the Leningrad Codex because at one time it was in Leningrad. Leningrad, you may know, was the name for St. Petersburg. Now it's called St. Petersburg again, but they still call this the Leningrad Codex. It's manuscript B19A in the Hermitage, which is the Louvre of Russia. It's a 3-column manuscript, and you can see, well, we know exactly the year it was written because the guy who copied it dated it. So it was copied in 1008 AD, so this was a medieval manuscript, and he signed his name to it. I've forgotten his name, but he was a Hebrew scribe, and he wrote it out. And so this is the oldest complete manuscript we have of the Old Testament. We have partial manuscripts that are older than this, but this is the oldest complete one, so every printed Hebrew Bible is just a reprinting of this text, which means that this is not an eclectic text like a New Testament where they've, searched out every manuscript, compared each word, printed what they're certain is the original. This is, our printed Hebrew Bible is simply a very good copy of one medieval manuscript that happens to be the oldest complete one we have. So why is pointing so hard? Well, what pointing is simply the system in this document. So this is through the section Yom Echad, so this is through the first 5 verses. If I put a bigger picture, these little circles are little marginal notes about these words and like unusual forms or whatever. But you can see that it's our pointing, merachefet, and you can see it's got a little accent there. Elohim, you can't really see the holum very well, but you can see that's our word. Al Pnei Hamayim. And so you can see that our printed text is just a faithful reproduction of this manuscript B19A. The problem with B19A is that Moses had never seen anything like that. When Moses wrote it, he wrote it in an unpointed text, and people memorized the sound, Bereshit bara Elohim. And so when they wrote it down, they only wrote it with consonants, and they got the vowels from hearing it read. So, imagine you've got a sentence. I've done this sentence a lot in my classes, but imagine you had a sentence that was written most people look at and say it says, I love my cat, right? But it could say, I love my coat, right, if you were spying. Or even, I love my city, or I leave my city. If you're just engaged, I love my cutie, I mean, lots of different ways to point that sentence. And by and large, this pointing is what this says, but there are places where you have debates. Is it coat or cat or cot? And you have the same thing here. The reason pointing is so hard is that this wasn't the first system that was tried. The first system that was tried was where they used a thing called mater lectionis, mothers of reading, where they used certain consonants to be pseudo vowels. And so when this was originally written, it was written Beit Resh Aleph Sin Tav. And then somewhere before 1008, but before they came up with the dots, they started putting these letters in as mother of reading, as reading helpers. And so you get kind of this system. But what that means is by the time we come to our system, somewhere along the line, the copyist said, we just can't go adding these letters. And they started counting the letters. That's what the term Masoret means, counters. And so this is called the Masoretic text, where they went through and counted all the olives, counted all the baits, and came up with a number. And the way they would check that they had copied the manuscript accurately is if those numbers agreed with the table they already had. We have manuscripts that have those tables of numbers at the end of books, so you can go through and count up the letters to make sure you corrected it rightly. And if those numbers are wrong, then the manuscript is defective and you can't use it. So by the time it comes to us in the printed text of B19A, you've got a system of mater lectiona, or as I don't know how you say the plural, mater lectionis is the singular, mother of reading. But what you have is kind of two systems where they started keeping those consonantal vowels that were really helping vowels, and then they pointed it as well. And so what you get is these apparently were the letters they thought were the mater lectionis. And then they started doing it this way, where you have long vowels but without consonants. And if you noticed, like this chart is saying there's a long hierarch and a short hierarch. Well, really, what this hierarch was probably a mater lectionis that was written defectively. So once they started counting, they just wouldn't add the letters, and they would say, okay, this should have been a yod as a consonantal letter, but if I add it, it's going to throw my number off. So I'm not going to add it, but it's actually a long. So you get this system that you kind of read it and you think, wow, that doesn't really coincide with the rule that I learned. And the reason is because there are two different systems in the printed text. When you go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is no pointing in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are only the mater lectionis letters. And so That's why when you get, this is how you say this, you'll often get scholars that will put it different ways. And what they're doing is they're reading it, okay, is this a defective Heuric or is it a real Heuric? But it makes it hard for us when we're trying to learn, because you want a chart that like you can take to the bank and never have an exception, and you just don't have that in Hebrew. So you get different scholars kind of come up with these charts differently. I love this one, which is from a Logos-based introduction from Racine. And Racine actually points out that there are two other systems that are used. So we're reading B19A, which is used Tiberian, and it's called Tiberian because it was pointed probably in Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. And so it's their school that used this. So this is kind of the one we're learning, but there's a Palestinian one, that has different pointing, and even a Babylonian one that has different pointing. So when you have this consonantal text, the reason it's so hard is there are three different systems, and even in the system that we're using, there's the leftovers of a previous unsuccessful or partially successful system. And so what that means is we get to follow our one rule that we can take to the bank, and that is listen to the MP3 guy and do it exactly the way he did it. Don't try to figure out like the 2,000 rules because it's going to drive you crazy. Just copy what he does. And know, hey, there's this underlying inconsistency in pointing because they tried it several different ways before they got to one that they settled on. So before we go on, are there any observations or questions?
So when you look at Greek texts, we have the biblical texts, and they all are written with the letters in one particular way. But if you look at classical Greek texts, say something from Homer's time or something like that, the letters are drawn so differently that you would barely think that they were the same language. I assume with that many thousands of years of history, the letters that we are learning as Hebrew are not the letters that were originally used in, say,
That's exactly right. There's an alphabet called Paleo Hebrew, and it looks nothing like what we're learning is called square script, and square script is actually Aramaic. It was when Israel went into captivity, they learned Aramaic, and so when they came back, they spoke Aramaic and did not converse in Hebrew. But because Aramaic was more elegant, they somewhere in their past switched to the square script. So actually the alphabet, we say this is a Hebrew alphabet. It's not really the Hebrew alphabet, it's the Aramaic alphabet. But all the manuscripts that we have, like Dead Sea Scrolls, except a very few, we do have like a Paleo Hebrew Deuteronomy, I think, and then the inscriptions, like Hezekiah's inscription is in Paleo Hebrew. So you wonder when you've got a text like Jeremiah, I think 11, or even Psalm 2, that has Aramaic in it, you wonder if originally it was written in Paleo Hebrew and then the Aramaic words were written in square script. But because all of it's square script for us, it's all written in the same alphabet. So,
what would these letters have been written? What device were they used? I'm really struggling to write out Hebrew letters using a pen because
there's a reason you're struggling.
shapes.
Well, it's meant for somebody who's left-handed. Look at how the letters are, it's written from right to left, You don't do that if you're writing with your right hand. And if you even look at how the letters are raised, it's made to do if you're left-handed. A lot of really old language, like really old Greek, when you get to that linear A and linear B, is actually written. And I've heard the theory is that smart people in antiquity were left-handed, and then something happened where nearly the entire population switched. And so the languages switched as well to go left to right, which would favor a right-handed person. But when you get these really old languages like Hebrew, like Aramaic, like Syriac, like Arabic, they're still written from right to left. And if you've ever seen a copyist who's right-handed, you'll notice that they have a stick that they use, and they put this stick on the manuscript so their hand won't smudge the letters, but the stick, they're resting their hand on the stick and writing so that they won't smudge through the letters. But it was written. I mean, think about how easy it would be to write that if you were left-handed versus write that, and of course you're all into your previous letter.
If you were teaching people from a young age that they had to write with their left hand, then the muscles would have caught up and they would have been fine. But
You know, a fountain pen will help a little bit because fountain pens will slow you down because you're right, but it is made for someone who is left-handed. At least that's my opinion with it. So, and I don't know if I read that or just, but I think once you start exploring, was this favoring? It's like, yes, it was favored for somebody who's left-handed. All right. So what we're going to do, study guide 5, and we don't really have that much. Well, we have a little bit new to do, but it's really simple. So the vocab will be on the B part. So for 5A, what we're going to do is memorize the call perfect and imperfect conjugation. And you say, well, what is that? Well, conjugations have to do with verbs. And so you know how most verb charts have 6 blocks. First, second, third, singular, plural. Well, Hebrew is different. And Hebrew is backward in that this is your third masculine singular, third feminine singular, second masculine singular, second feminine singular, first common singular. So, don't know why they did it this way, but they picked the word kill as the paradigm word. So, you know, if we were learning Latin, we would be saying amo, amas, amat, I love, you love, he, she, or it loves. In Hebrew, you say he kills, she kills, you kill. So I don't know why they did it, other than that this is a really regular verb. So they didn't want any kind of strangeness in there. So this word is totally normal. It just happens to be a bad word for us to be memorizing over and over. Did you have a question, Jacob?
Yeah, so the first 4 are feminine and masculine, singular and plural, right?
Right, and so that's the odd thing that Hebrew can do that not many other languages can do. They can differentiate, is the person who's acting a man or a woman. So this is he killed, and that's your kind of don't add anything. Katela, so notice that's a methag. So this is katal, he killed. Katela, so that's a methag vocal shva, that's your ending. That's she killed. Katalta, so your accent is there. Katalta is you killed, and the you is a man. Katalt, so two silent schwas together, you just say it as if they were like that. Katalt, that's you killed if the you is a woman. And then katalti, accent on the second, katalti is I kill, but it doesn't, there's no differentiation if the I is a man or a woman. So that's called a first common singular. Third masculine singular, third feminine singular, second masculine singular, second feminine singular, first common. There is an infinitive. But we're only going to do perfects and imperfects today. So perfect, we're tempted to think in terms of time. They didn't think in terms of time. They thought in terms of completed action. Since most completed action is in the past, we'll translate it, he killed. But it could be he killed if it's completed in the present. That could be just as valid a translation. Then we don't have a separate feminine plural. Excuse me.
So is it the same then as the singular?
Right, so this will be third masculine, third feminine, so you could just repeat that, but most people just say this one and call it a third common plural. Katilu, so notice your method, that's a vocal schwa. Katilu, they killed. You can say katilu again if you want, or you can just say it's a common form. Kataltem, so that's you kill, but it's you plural, and it's you masculine plural. So I don't know of any other language that can do that has a separate masculine and feminine you and a separate singular and feminine you. In English, we just have you, and it's masculine, feminine, singular, and neuter. Unless you're in the South, and some people say y'all, y'all would be a second plural, but they're even taking it one step beyond where they have masculine and feminine, both singular and plural in the second. And then katalnu is your first common plural. We killed. So katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti, katalu, kataltem, katalten, katalnu. So what I want you to be able to do is do that. Katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti, katalu, kataltim, kataltin, katalnu. And so third masculine, feminine, second masculine, feminine, first common, third common plural, second masculine plural, second feminine plural, first common plural. That's the perfect. So those dots can be taken to other words and turn the other words into he paints, she paints, whatever the word means. But this is kind of the standard way that you start. So we're learning these so we can take these dots to other words. You with me? Does that seem okay? So the imperfect, if the perfect is completed action, the imperfect is incompleted action. I was killing, but it can also be, or I will be killing. I was killing, or I will be killing. And there's no difference.
So this is the way that they wrote these things down. This is the way that they you're talking is by other clues within the sentence.
Other clues within the sentence.
I feel like that tells us a lot about their culture and their idea of time as a culture.
And you wonder, I mean, does God in his infinite wisdom, I mean, for God it's all one, you know, like the past is the future to God, and you wonder if even this kind of clunkiness in the language is actually telling a beautiful spiritual truth, because like when God says, I am who I am, I mean, yeah is like, and you could translate, I was who I was, I will be, I am being who I am being, and it may mean all three of those things at exactly the same time.
Can you give us, I guess, the two example sentences of how it can be used in an incomplete past and an incomplete future?
He was killing all the enemies of the Lord. He will be killing all the enemies of the Lord.
Would that cause any confusion with things like prophecies?
Well, you have this weird thing that when you describe time, the first one in the story will establish what it is. And like if you start with a perfect, he killed blank. The next one will say, and he was killing, and he was singing, and he was praising, and he was going home. So the first one is a perfect, and then the rest of them are imperfect, and they'll call those converted perfects, or some people call them Vav consecutives, or some people call them Vav conversives. But what it is you start with whatever it really is, and then you use the opposite one for all the rest of them and put an and. So as long as you do the first one, and he did, and he did, and he did, all of those are converted into whatever the first one was.
So it being past tense, then, correct?
Yeah, so if you start with a perfect, all the rest of them will be imperfect, but they're converted forms. And if the first one is imperfect, all the rest of them will be perfect, but they're converted perfects back to imperfects.
Jacob was eating breakfast. That's past tense, and it's obviously I'm talking about past tense. But in this case, I could also be making a prophecy. Jacob will be eating breakfast.
And the Ten Commandments. This is where the Ten Commandments are so beautiful. In the Ten Commandments, it doesn't use a adjussive. You should not kill. It uses an imperfect. You will not kill. Which may be a prohibition. It is a prohibition, but it may be a promise. The day will come when you will not kill. Like the meta-narrative, like when the total transformation happens, you will not bear false witness, you will not steal, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart, the whole mind. You will love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, it could be a prophecy of what God is going to do. And because the language is set up where the tense can actually mean either one of those, you wonder if like God didn't do that on purpose.
It almost reads less like guidelines in that sense and more of like expectations from there. Like, you know, these are the house rules. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And this is what you're going to be like. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is very gracious. And remember, when God gives these, he first gets inside thorns, and he's talking about going back to this Eden-like land. And then in the meta-narrative, to make that true, Yahweh gets into thorns again and fixes it where we will do these things. So the way you say these are yiktol, tiktol, tiktol, tiktili, ektol, yik telu. So whenever you have two shvas, First one's silent, the second's vocal. Yiktelu, tiktol-na, so accent. Tiktol-na. Tiktelu, as you go from Yiktelu to Tiktelu. Yiktelu, tiktol-na. Tiktelu, tiktol-na. So that's weird that the third feminine is the same as the second feminine. And then niktol is your first common plural. So he was killing, she was killing, you man were killing, you woman was killing, I was killing, they were killing. And notice this isn't a common form. They men were killing, they women were killing, you men were killing, you women were killing, we were killing. You with me? So the great thing is we get to memorize these two charts, and it's a foundation stone for like the language. Once we memorize this column, so we get this column really down, we can make a PL by doubling the middle radical. That's why this is called the double. The ground stem, the doubled stem. It's called a PL because they used to use the word pa'al, which means do, make, or act. That used to be the paradigm word. The problem was pa'al is an irregular verb, so they would have you memorize it, but you're memorizing it with the guttural middle letters, so it's like, okay, we're going to throw that out and get a regular verb. So they changed it from pa'al to katal. So now it's just totally messed up for us.
Is this verb chart in that huge file you gave us of all those different documents?
It is, and this is made to be printed out as a ledger thing. I'll try to print it out for you. It costs like $1 or something. In the mail, the older mail lady Jan will do it for you if you email. Tell her you want it on ledger, or if I do it for you, I will, and then take it to the library and get it laminated. And this is made to be an 11 by 17, and it has all the forms on it. So call is the simple, so I kill. The PL, what does a PL do? Well, it's an intensive. So if this is kill, what would a PL be? Like massacre, slaughter the daylight, like just go on, you know. So that's what a PL does. So he killed, he like just went berserk, killing people. This is a causative. He caused someone else to kill. And the way you do that is you add he to the beginning and eel, hith, feel, and that turns it into he did it, but you keep the same endings. A, ta, ta, ti, u, tem, ten, nu. So once you have this and you add a hit and an eel, then that gives you your causative.
So where, or how and where do you know, I guess, where to put the I in that?
You put it between the second radical and the third radical.
So you make it the second to last.
Right, so if katal, if those three are your letters, and most Hebrew words are 3 letters. They call them radicals, so it's based on a tri-radical root, most words are. So between the second and third letter, you add this eel, and that gives you the causative. These 3 are passives of these. So if this is your simple, he killed, this would be, what would be the passive of that be? If this is he killed, sorry? He was killed. He was killed, she was killed, you were killed, you women were killed, I was killed, we were killed, you men were killed, you women were killed, we were killed. Well, if it were the imperfect, yeah, he will be killed. So if this is your intensive, he slaughtered, what would your pu'al be?
So is that a combination of the real and the passive?
So what would it be?
He will be slaughtered. He was slaughtered.
So that would be this one, the imperfect. Yeah, so he was slaughtered. And if this is he will cause someone else to kill, this one would be he was killed. So it isn't like you want it to be intensive, but it's just causative of the call. So this is simple. That's what call means, simple. Piel is the intense. Hiphil is the causative. Passive, simple. Passive, intensive. Passive, causative. He was made to kill someone else. And then we have the hithpael, which you add hith to the start and double the radical, hithpael. And it's the reflexive. Now, I've never seen this in any book, but my Hebrew teacher drew it on the board, and I've used it every day I've ever read Hebrew. He says the Hebrew verb system is a menorah. The simple, the passive, the intensive, the passive, causative, the passive, the reflexive. So if you can remember that, like, that's it in terms of the Hebrew system. So, do you see why we need to get these two charts down? Like, really? Because once we have the endings are the same for all seven. And so they'll call these binyans. Some people call them stems. But what it is are the columns on this menorah. So we really need to get where we can write this out. Now, the nice thing that I did is I gave you a practice sheet with those boxes, but with the word katal, the 3 letters already there, but no pointing. So you can print that out and you can just point it, practice pointing it. And so I have laminated it before and gotten a whiteboard marker and pointed it with the whiteboard marker, and then you can wipe it off. But that's up to you, whatever you want to do. So do you think we can do that? Get these two perfect and imperfect? So I think that there might be more on the test, but you can ignore that. If you just get these, you're in good shape. So this we know, the difference between a masculine and a feminine, difference between a masculine dual and a feminine dual, and a masculine plural and a feminine plural. This is a little tricky, but it's not that hard to see. If this is horse, the normal way you say the horse is you put ha in the front and then you double the first letter. So anytime you want to say the anything, just put ha, the hey, the pata, and then double the first letter. Now, the only letters that won't let you do that are these 5 letters. These 5 letters won't let you double them. So what do you do? Wouldn't it be nice if they just had one rule and they always did the same thing? They don't. For olives, they lengthen. So it's ha Elohim. For verbs that start with any H sound, they don't do anything. So ha hen, ha haya, chaya. With an ayin they lengthen, and with a resh they lengthen. So aleph, ayin, and resh lengthen. Hey and chet don't lengthen. But none of those 5 letters can take a doubling dagesh. So, all right?
So that one, chaya,
The life, or the living thing, I guess.
we have that as as a vocabulary term, and we have it in verb form. Does this mean that you can basically take any verb and just stick the noun stuff on it?
That's how it works. So you learn a 3 radical root, like davar, word. Diver is the verb, but it's only used in the PL. So if davar means speak, diver means something like proclaim.
I guess English kind of does that because you talk about running, but you can, if someone gets done running, you're like, how was the run?
Yeah, where run is the verb and the noun. I think I put on here right out from memory. We can hold off on that. 5b, we've got 15 more words. They're really easy. Words like David, Moses, Allah is go up. So, and these all appear lots of times in the text. So we're still into that huge number of words. So you don't have to do that this time, and you don't have to do any of these. Just know that they're there, but really get these 2 charts down where you can write it out. Use the practice one, this practice sheet of blank forms. And if we do that, we'll be in good shape, I think. Are there any questions, or do you guys feel pretty good? How is the pace okay? I'm not asking you to do too little or too much. I mean, that's what I'm trying to shoot for.
For me, I mean, like we've been studying vocab together, and it's been pretty easy with flashcards and stuff. Same with the endings and such. However,
We totally screwed up here and studied 5 8 7.
yeah, we did do that. But
So that one easy for us.
what would you recommend for studying the actual translations, like Genesis 1 through 8?
So the thing that helped me more than anything is when I memorized it, because I couldn't memorize it until I understood the grammar. And so I'm having you guys memorize the first 5 verses, and you'll find that when you do that, particularly if you get where you can write it out, it's going to solve tons of things in Hebrew. So like Bereshit, well, I know this is in, and Reshit is like your head. So in the beginning, bara. That should be bara like that with a patah, but because it ends in an aleph, you lengthen that. So any verb that ends in an aleph, you'll lengthen that patah to a comments. And you remember that because you're going to write it and then correct what you do and say, why is it like that? And realize, oh, it's an exception of 3rd radicals. Elohim, so that's a compound schwa, sagol, et, and if it has the makaf, it's going to be et with the sagol. If it doesn't have the makaf, it will be 8. But if you listen to him say it, he's going to say et. So he's right and we're wrong. But that's how I remember. Okay, no makaf, but et, because he's saying it that way, even though I would say it different. Et ha-sha, so there's your word, the double first radical. Mayim is your plural. The plural heavens, and the haaretz. So hey before an aleph lengthens, because you can't double an aleph, so it's haaretz.
That was right there on the start of the second line. That is and.
and the land. So some people have argued that this is not about the creation of the world, it's about the creation of Israel. I don't buy that, but it is an interesting thing that aretz can mean either of those things, world or land. And gay in Greek can mean either of those things, world or land.
Is that a popular view in any specific, like, I guess,
John
ancient Judaism?
John Sailhammer argues for it forcefully, and Sailhammer could volume read Hebrew better than anybody I know. I'm not persuaded by his view here, but he did hold that view. It's at least foreshadowing the land of Israel, particularly if the land of Israel is somehow connected to the Garden of Eden. V'ha'aretz ha'yitah. So the rule is you can't have an unaccented long closed syllable. So it can't be ha'yitah, with this being it has to be ha-yi, vocal shva, ta. And if you listen to the guy, that's exactly how he says it, ha'yitah. V'ha'aretz ha'yitah tohu. It should be thohu, but remember we're doing the modern, and the moderns don't do the begad kafat with tav, so it's tohu. Va, and if you listen to him, he's going to say vohu, va, vo. And he's saying that because this doesn't have the dagesh in it, so the H sound is there, because the dot takes the H sound out. Va, vohu, vechoshek, al pnei tehom, upon the faces of the deep. So what we're going to do is we're just going to read that. We're going to just keep reading Genesis 1. We're going to start reading Exodus 20, which are the 10 Commandments. Eventually we'll start reading a little in Ezekiel 36. And those three passages, you start putting those together, and the biblical theology of the Hebrew Bible just starts to just blossom. So like when God says he's going to gather us together, do you want that to be in the call, or do you want it to be in the PL? Because it's in the PL. So it isn't that he's going to gather. It's like he's going to gather the daylights. You know, he's going to make you such a great one group. You know, and there's no way to say that in English, but it's exactly what's being said in Hebrew. And we're going to see gems like that over and over and over. And it's going to be so cool. And it's going to be so worth memorizing these paradigms and these words. All right? Okay, I'll see you on Wednesday.